Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. We're just about in the afternoon now, last day of Family Mediation Week. So thank you so much for joining us. And we really hope that we'll be able to share our knowledge and enable you to have a far better understanding of what family mediation is all about. So I am Mary Raymont. I am a mediator. I run Advantaged Mediation Limited. I am based in Kent and London and online. And I'm delighted to be here with Ruth Hay.
I'm Ruth Hay. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm a family mediator and a child inclusive mediator, and I work regionally in the Midlands, but also online. And I've recently been appointed as the mediator representative on the Family Justice Council. And we are looking forward to sharing our knowledge with you. And if you have any questions, then please ask.
Brilliant. So our Q&A function is going to be enabled. So do just bung some questions in the Q&A function and we'll answer them as we go. Just to let you know that we are recording this webinar. It's going to be used as an educational tool. So hopefully if you found it useful, it will be going up on the Family Mediation Council website in a couple of weeks' time from once all the costs and fees have been edited out. And these slides as well from this webinar will also be available in the on the website, on the Family Mediation Council website. So please feel free to direct people to the link to this webinar if you think that it would help someone in the therapeutic or healthcare sector to understand a bit more about family mediation. That resource will be on the Family Mediation Council website. So the purpose really of today is to just give you more confidence to understand when people are talking to you, when patients or clients are talking to you about family mediation, and mention it and maybe ask you, you know, whether they think, whether you think that will be helpful to them, or when you think that possibly they could do with additional resources, that you have a better understanding of what family mediation is all about. So we really hope by the end of this session, you will really feel much more confident in being able to talk about family mediation and knowing what it is. And as I said before, please do ask us any questions that you want to, and we'll deal with them along the way. So thank you, Katie. Can we have the next slide, please?
So what is family mediation? Family mediation offers a support service to couples, parents and extended families when they're at the stages of separation, divorce or facing family relationship breakdown. And it offers support when they're facing challenges further down the line, even when they have separated or divorced and they may be having difficulties with child arrangements, etc. Whilst it sits within the framework of the court protocol, we would prefer it was seen as a support service to remove the need for the court involvement and to support families to have productive discussions, to seek a mutual understanding and agreements with the support of an impartial third party. Family and friends may be able to assist you in having discussions, but it's very difficult for them to maintain impartiality when the outcome often has an impact on the person that's trying to mediate. They care about these people personally. For example, a grandparent trying to support a couple discussing child arrangements may seem okay, but what about when those arrangements impact on that grandparent's access to their grandchildren? Impartiality not quite so easy to maintain. And whilst we're working with families in challenging situations who are highly emotional, our role is not there to work with them therapeutically, but to assist them to discuss their situation, share their concerns and their worries with us, and help them to look for solutions, and to support them in meeting mutual understandings and agreements to create a new framework for them to move forward to, be it for their financials or be it for their child matters. They've worked in a certain way and now they need to create a new model to be able to move forward. And that's really what family mediation offers them, an exploration. We have stages in mediation, and the first stage of a mediation, could we change the slide, please? The first part of a mediation is what they call a MIAM assessment. And Mary's going to explain to you what a MIAM assessment is.
Okay, so some people will call this an intake meeting. I call it a one-to-one meeting because I feel like MIAM is a really big mouthful. It has got actually a legal explanation of what those initials stand for, and I'll move on to that. But really, the main thing for you to know is that if someone goes to see a family mediator, they will always have this initial, and it might be easier for you to understand it as like a triage meeting. So it's where the mediator will meet each person that's involved in the situation. So if that's parents, they'll meet each parent and they will meet them individually. So we never have these intake meetings with two people at the same time. Because it's really crucially important that we have the opportunity of making sure that they are safe, and we'll talk about that later on. So MIAM stands for Mediation Information Assessment Meeting. For the vast majority of the time, this is entirely voluntary and not compulsory, insofar as most people aren't going to go to court. If someone is going to court, though, it may be something that they have to do. This is not mediation. It's not compulsory mediation. It's a mediation information and assessment meeting. And what that means is that there's a range of things that the mediator is going to talk to that person about on a one-to-one basis, and assess the situation and work out how that individual can be supported. As I say, it can be part of the court protocol. So, for example, if someone wants to apply to the court for a child arrangements order or for a financial order in divorce, for example, then before they can go to court, it's a bit of a gatekeeping exercise. So they will go to a mediator and they will ask the mediator to have one of these assessment meetings, and that mediator can then sign a form to say that they've attended and that mediation is not suitable, because if mediation is suitable, then the form is not required. The vast majority of people, as I say, come to a mediation assessment meeting without wanting to go to court. As I say, it's also a meeting that's called an intake meeting or a one-to-one meeting. And we as mediators have a raft of targets that we need to hit within that meeting. And that will include all sorts of sources of information. So we might be signposting people to a healthcare setting or a therapeutic setting. We might be signposting people to citizens advice bureaus, to legal advice, to domestic abuse advice. So we will be doing lots of signposting within that meeting. It's a one-to-one confidential meeting, so the meeting is not something that's shared with anybody else at that stage. But if people do come into a joint mediation meeting, we can't hold secrets that might be relevant. But at this stage, when you have the initial one-to-one meeting, it is confidential. And it's a really great opportunity for someone to meet their mediator, to outline their concerns and their difficulties, and to really focus on what the issues are, what needs to be sorted out. Obviously, the mediator has the opportunity to outline what mediation is, and we'll be talking about that a bit more in a minute, and just the unique parts of mediation. But the name is a bit of a misnomer, because actually we're not just talking about mediation, we're talking about all forms of solutions. So we're talking about what we call kitchen table discussions, that's informal discussions. We're talking about sister correspondence. We're talking about using a third party like ourselves to get involved and to support people to make their own decisions. We're also talking about other approaches where they do need other people to make decisions for them. So that would be, for example, the court. So we just wanted to put this in here because we feel like MIAM is a term that's bandied around, and it's very confusing for people as to what it actually is. But it's a voluntary information triage meeting, and ultimately also an assessment meeting where the mediator is going to say to somebody, actually, I've assessed that your situation is not suitable for mediation, but you could try these other approaches. So we will be talking later on, the main reason why we might assess that it's not suitable would be domestic abuse. But we may say it's suitable, and in that case, we would then contact the other person and have a very similar meeting, confidential meeting, all the same issues, you know, what needs to be resolved, have you tried to resolve it already? Again, we would hit all those targets. So, for example, one of the things we're required to do is to make sure that we check whether someone is eligible for legal aid, and to check whether, as I say, mediation is suitable at all. So that's the MIAM, but we'll be coming back to that again later on in the session. Thank you, Katie. Can we have the next slide, please?
Mary, that's you continued.
So when can mediation help? Well, we take the view that mediation can help at any time. And really that's from the point at which the difficulty arises up to the point at which a couple might be on the verge of their final court hearing, but they want to give mediation one last shot. So mediation is an approach to sort out a situation where there's difference of opinion and we're trying to get a consensus. What we would say is that it's really important to understand that we will, as I said, signpost people out to other resources. So we very much acknowledge that in the early days of a separation, it might be that a couple's difficulties are escalated and maybe their arguments are escalating, and we know through theoretical research that escalation can cause, for example, more serious incidents of domestic abuse. So we're very mindful of that. We might be signposting people out to a domestic abuse service. People might be in crisis at that very early stage and really need therapeutic resources. They might need to go to their GP for some additional support. For example, they might be going through that bereavement cycle and that grief cycle, and they might be feeling depression, for example. And so we can certainly flag that resource as well. So subject to it being suitable, and sometimes we'll say to people, look, we think maybe you need to do some additional work, but come back later, you could use this service. Subject to being suitable, you can use mediation at any stage, and you can recommend mediation to have that intake meeting, to do that triage, to see if it will be helpful to someone from any point. So as Ruth alluded to earlier, it's to make arrangements for anything arising when you've got family difficulties. So they tend to fall into two main categories. That's finances. So people might be saying to us, I don't know where I'm going to live, how I'm going to live, how I'm going to afford to live. My mortgage term is coming up for renewal. I've got a fixed rate mortgage. I'm desperately worried about how we're going to manage that. How are we both going to live in separate places? How is our credit card going to be dealt with? We've got a car loan. How are we going to pay that? And those are very, very typical financial concerns. Similarly, we have people coming to us saying, I need to sort out arrangements for my children. From, we haven't told the children, we don't know how to tell the children. Can you give me some coaching around that? To we just cannot agree the arrangements for the children. To we've agreed the arrangements for the children, but we just can't decide what school they should attend. Or to people saying, oh, I want to leave the country, or I want to move back to where my parents came from up north. So it's such a massive range of potential possibilities and problems that people might be overwhelmed by. And what we try to do is to break it down into short, medium and long-term things that need to be sorted out, just to make it less overwhelming and more bite-sized. So someone might be saying, well, I don't know where I'm going to end up living. So, where are you living now? Where can you live over the next few months? What about up to a year? And then if we can't sort the mortgage out, maybe you're going to have to change housing and that sort of thing. So just really trying to make things more bite-sized for people. And they can be issues that aren't legal issues that a court wouldn't really get involved in. I mean, I've done a mediation around pets. I've done mediations around really valued items that have a lot of sentimental value, but couples couldn't resolve. So it can be issues that are legal issues. That's typically what we do, but it can also be issues that aren't legal issues. As Ruth said, it can be grandparents, it can be extended family members, aunties, uncles that aren't spending time with their nephews, nieces, grandchildren. And it can be very typically for blended families where you've got a couple, they've had a child, they've separated, and then they've each got new partners, they've got more children. So we're just trying to work out arrangements for just a whole range of modern families. And what I would say is that mediation is a modern approach. It is not court driven. It's trying to work holistically 360 degrees with families. Thanks very much. Katie, if you could move the slides on.
So where do you fit in, and where do your patients and your clients fit in? You're often the first port of call when somebody's facing difficulties, be it because of their health or they don't feel emotionally balanced and they need some support. You're going to be the first port of call where somebody's going to share with you what's happening in their lives. You may not be able to directly assist them with the issues that they're presenting to you. And I think as all people that work with individuals and families, We all feel that we need that. Where do I signpost this person to? Where can I get that person help? I can't do this, but who can? And I think that's really what's important with particularly the MIAM, and even when in mediation, is moving people to where they need to be, always looking at it. We all have our own skills and we all have our own frameworks to work in. And I think sometimes we go, I can't do it, but I really need to find somebody that can. And having this as an additional resource will be really, really helpful. And also about giving you the confidence to be able to say to somebody, go and attend a MIAM assessment meeting and just understand what those pathways might look like. Even if that's the only piece that you feel the confidence in, that's fine, because the next bit is the bit that we know and the bit that we do. Connecting with your local mediator, establishing a relationship with them can be really helpful for you to build that confidence. We all, when we signpost on, we all have to feel confident where we're passing that person to, or where we're saying, maybe try this or maybe try that. And the majority of mediators will have a bank of resources of people that they are fully trusting and fully confident in. So we want you to have the confidence to be able to say to your clients and your patients, go and attend a MIAM assessment meeting and see if they can help. We are aware where domestic abuse is present, and this will have been shared with some of you, with some of your patients and clients, there may be a reluctance to signpost them to come to a mediation. It's not mediation. So please remember, when people say, I have to go to mediation, they don't. Entering mediation is voluntary, and the MIAM is also voluntary, but the MIAM is a critical point for them to be able to get access more information and feel reassured maybe about some of the things that they don't know. Knowing that MIAM is undertaken individually, they are not going to be going with their partner or their ex-partner. And it is a triage of that situation. They are not going to naturally be herded into mediation if it is not suitable. And if it's not deemed appropriate, we will tell them it's not deemed appropriate. Hopefully they will agree to come into mediation and it will be assessed as suitable. But if it's not, that's fine. We still need to be able to move that person to somewhere else and signpost them and say, what do you do next? I always think this is about being taken by the hand and led through a process that you know nothing about. And I think somebody just saying to you, okay, it's all really overwhelming. Let's just take the next step and let's see what the next step looks like. So yes, families going through disputes, divorce, separation, we are the best place really to give them that impartial information about what they need to do next. And just to reassure you, within the MIAM, there is a screening. We do a screening for domestic abuse. We take them through that screening to make sure that they are comfortable coming into mediation, that they don't feel any coercion or fear or intimidation from that other party. Are they ready? Are they emotionally ready to enter mediation? Is there a willingness to mediate? You know, have they been coerced to attend? You know, we're going to be going through all of these questions with them. We are really mindful that having direct conversations with somebody that maybe you can't communicate with, you know, is really, really difficult. We might decide to do a piece of communication work with them initially to be able to help them to communicate better before they're tackling those big questions, those big decisions they have to make. We're going to check with them, are there any court orders in place regarding the contact they have with each other or what either party has with their children? Has there been any domestic abuse in the past or in the present? How are they feeling now? Are any other services engaged? Do we have any social services involvement? Do we have domestic abuse support workers in place? What is this person's situation? Are the police involved? Have we had any criminal convictions? Are there any restrictions that we need to know about? Does either party have any concerns about safeguarding for a child or an adult sometimes? Sometimes adults start new relationships and their ex-partners are worried that their lack of contact with their children is not about their ex-partner, it's to do with the ex-partner's new partner. So do we have concerns and worries about that? Are there any addiction issues? Do we need to be aware of any dependencies there may be on alcohol or drugs? You know, what is happening? Are there any mental health issues? You know, what is this person's competence to deal with financial issues and elements in mediation? Are they equipped to do it? Mediation is not for everybody. It is a really hands-on process. And actually, it isn't for everybody. And that's our role, is to say, actually, maybe this isn't suitable for you. But the confidence I want to give to you as health practitioners dealing with people in very emotionally difficult situations, and sometimes health situations as well, is that we are not just going to say, you know, yes, it's fine, it's fine. They are taken through a very robust screening before we make that decision as to whether we're going to move it forward. And at the end of the day, they get the final choice. We will say to them, this is what mediation is. This is how we can help you. Yes, we might deem it as suitable, but do you feel able to engage with it? And if they say no, that's absolutely fine. It's their life, it's not ours. So they have to be able to engage in that. I think one of the
to also ensure that they understand all the different other approaches that there are, so that you know, they know that there's the alternative of using their own resources to communicate. We refer to apps like our Family Wizard, who are supporting this webinar today. That's a brilliant co-parenting app, for example. There's other resources like solicitor negotiation. There's obviously the court resource. So we will talk about all the different resources. I just want to speak to a question that Sarah Temple. Thank you so much for asking that question, Sarah. No, you shouldn't know it. I don't see why you should know whether the MIAM assessment is free at all. That's what we're here to explain to you. But thanks, it's a really good question. In some instances, it is free. And that's what we're going to talk about later, which is if you're eligible for legal aid. But in many instances, it's not free. And the charge for the MIAM is really different, and it varies from location to location. So you're based in Somerset, for example, and I know some mediators in Somerset, and I know that they charge completely different prices for their MIAM. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how people can access mediators in a bit. But yeah, it's a really good question. I'm going to talk a bit more about it when we get further along in this presentation. But thanks for mentioning that. It's a really good point, and we will be covering it.
One of the things I think has come out as a question, I think prior to this assessment, which I'm going to ask Mary now. Often people will say, why would somebody go to a mediator and not go to a solicitor? Why do I need both? So as you have a legal background, Mary, and I'm going to let you answer that.
So, I mean, I would just say that a mediator is never going to, well, first of all, a mediator can't give legal advice. So what the mediator can do is give legal information. So we tend to say, if you can find it on Google, that's legal information, and we feel comfortable giving that out, and we know obviously where to look for it, and we've got that information in our minds. But what we can't ever do is say, Mrs. S or Mr. S, this is what I recommend for you. So we can't advise them as to what to do, but we can give them information about how other families tend to approach these situations, or even how the court will approach the situation. Why would someone go to a lawyer to a mediator instead of a lawyer? Well, they won't necessarily. A lot of people tend to go to lawyers and get legal advice. All I would say is that mediators, one of our criteria in our code of practice is that we have to signpost people when we think it would be helpful for them to get legal advice, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But a lawyer will give advice. So a lawyer wants to have all the information possible and then give an opinion and recommend something to someone. Whereas a mediator is going to look at the whole situation much more holistically. So going to give legal information where relevant, but also talk about, do we need to signpost you to a financial advisor or to the local CAB, or do we need to signpost you to your GP or to a local therapeutic service, to counsellors, or do we need to signpost you to a domestic abuse service? So mediators do a lot of signposting, including to lawyers, and can identify, well, if this is an issue, then it may well be that you might want to take legal advice about this, particularly with something that's really binary, like I want to remove my children from the country. That's only going to have a yes or no outcome. So although you can take that into mediation, it's something that you really need to know the law behind it to understand what the likely outcome is going to be. So we would signpost you to a lawyer, but mediators don't give legal advice, they give legal information. And mediators are working with the whole family. So we've got a 360-degree view of what's going on, whereas a lawyer, 90% of the time, is just working with one person. So they're hearing that person's narrative, they're getting that person's information. They haven't got the benefit of hearing the other person, hearing their narrative, looking at their information. And the mediator does have the benefit of that, albeit initially in separate meetings. but then hopefully the family will come together, and then we will do a 360-degree holistic approach. So that is a really fundamental difference. Although there is a change that's come about in the last couple of years where one lawyer can work for two clients if there's no conflict of interest. But that's still probably, I'd say, maybe 2% of the way people use their legal services. So a mediator does so much more than a lawyer is going to do. I have got a legal background, I am a lawyer. And what I realised when I stopped doing 80% law and 20% mediation and reversed it and did 80% mediation and 20% law, is that in that intake meeting, in that one-to-one, my role is to really look at the whole situation, the team around the client, who is supporting you, where do you want to get to, what information do you need to obtain, and hit all those targets that our code require of us. So hopefully that's an answer.
I'd say as well, just be mindful that actually it's really useful for people to be able to understand that these things can kind of run alongside each other, and you can kind of swim in and out, saying I can go to mediation. You're not legally bound by anything that's happened in mediation or your outcomes. You can take that and then take legal advice on it and then come back. So don't see them as silos that don't see them as silos that can't cross over, because they will. And if you come to an agreement in mediation, that will need to be turned into a legally binding document, particularly for finances, not necessarily for children. So again, we're going to need that solicitor at some point. So don't see them as being, I can only do one or the other. I can swim kind of in and out of all of those processes as well. I think that's useful to bear in mind.
So can we have the next slide, please, Katie? So I think Ruth, you've probably spoken to this already, really. But do you want to add anything?
The only thing I'd like to add is the difference between mediation and counselling and therapeutic work. Okay, because I think there is this sort of kind of misunderstanding that we are somehow going to be working with those couples and those families in that therapeutic sense. I know, because I come from a therapeutic background, if you're working, with a client therapeutically, you shouldn't be working with more than one therapist at a time. There's conflicting information there. As mediators, we are not there to deal with the emotional side of what's happening for them. We're there to help them move forward into their more logistical issues, be it housing, finances, etc. So there is a very, very distinct difference. If we feel that somebody needs to be emotionally prepared to come into mediation, we'll refer them to go and see a counsellor or a therapist to get them into that situation. We will not undertake that work ourselves. Even if the mediator has the professional training to do it, it is not within their framework to do it. We're all of us very aware as mediators that we have to be aware of our client's emotional position, and sometimes we have to do a little bit of management within a session, etc. But we are not there to deal with them therapeutically. They might be given, information regarding child development, relationship dynamics, but that's not us dealing with them therapeutically at all. So there is a very, very distinct difference. And I think that would be one really key point that I would like, people online to take away, that because somebody is in counselling does not mean to say they should not come into mediation, because they're very, very different disciplines. And I think even your clients and your patients knowing that we're not going to be dealing with that aspect of it would be really, really helpful. So that's the only thing I'd add.
Katie, can we have the next slide, please? So this is just your takeaway as to the key principles of family mediation, and this is one of the things that we explain within the mediation information assessment meeting or the intake meeting. Just a reminder again that is not a mediation meeting, and we'll have that one individual meeting with each of the people just to see whether they want to get to joint mediation. So if you have joint mediation, then we've talked about this already, it's entirely voluntary. There was a discussion in the press and in the government, there was a consultation as to whether mediation should be made compulsory. At this stage, it's looking like it won't be. And for us, it's an absolutely central tenet that mediation is voluntary. People do not have to come. And if they do come, they can leave at any time. And that's really important to us so that we don't feel that people are being coerced into making decisions. The second really important tenet is that mediation is confidential, and the confidentiality is really a confidentiality from a court. So if you come in and you have negotiations and discussions, you're not thinking, oh goodness, will this be used against me in the future? So we've got a contract, quite lengthy, that outlines that really, if you come into mediation, any discussions, negotiations, suggestions, proposals, even if you reach a consensus, that is confidential. If outside the mediation you want to make that legally binding or just much more formal, you can enter into a parenting plan or even a court order. But within mediation, we are confidential. You have the assurance that the discussions that we have are confidential, and that you can be assured that we can all lay our cards on the table, we can all make suggestions, think outside the box, have a really creative option development, look at best case, worst case scenarios, and really look at all the different possibilities and alternatives, and really look at things afresh as well. In terms of that confidentiality, it's just important to let you know that we're not bound by that confidentiality if there is any risk of safeguarding. So if there's a risk of harm to any person that's participating or a child, we do not consider ourselves bound by that confidentiality, and we will report if we think there's a safeguarding issue. And also if there's a crime being committed, then we will also consider that we're not bound by that confidentiality. And again, that's all in our contract. And everyone who comes into mediation is fully aware of the boundaries of our confidentiality. The mediator is impartial, so we don't know the people involved in the mediation. We don't have a relationship with them, be it therapeutic or legal or any other form of relationship. And it's really, really important that we maintain that impartiality, because obviously everyone has unconscious bias. We do an awful lot of training to try and be mindful of our unconscious bias, but we are there to be supportive of families and to enable them to reach solutions that perhaps we wouldn't have even thought about, or we wouldn't think is typical. There is no such thing as a typical or normal outcome. It's really what is suitable and tailored to your particular family. So impartiality is really, really important, so that people don't feel that they are creating alliances with us against anyone else, and that we don't have a preconceived idea of what the outcome should be. And then also, just to be clear about our role, we are not counsellors, we are not lawyers, so we're not giving advice, we're not giving therapeutic support. We're also not judges, so we're not determining the outcome. We're not going to sit there and listen to people and say, oh, well, I've heard what both of you have to say, and my decision is this. So it's really important that people understand that as well, because sometimes people think, well, we're going to tell you what we want, and then you're going to choose between the two of us. We don't do that as mediators. What we try and do is identify where the differences lie, and then use our skills as mediators to create solutions and do option development and put forward some suggestions or develop suggestions or look at consequences, try and look at from other people's point of view. So we've got a whole raft of tools that we use as mediators to support the people in mediation to get the outcome that they want. Really important as well that mediation agreements are not legally binding. So we talk about a consensus within mediation, and we can write that up as a memorandum document, which is confidential. But if the people who are participating in the mediation want that to be legally binding, they need to go outside of the mediation environment and get that written up by a lawyer, excuse me, or approved by a court. But that cannot happen within mediation, except for one exception, which is when people bring mediators, bring their lawyers into mediation, which is really unusual. That doesn't typically happen, but lawyers can support mediation if people are really stuck. We will use it as an impasse strategy. We can bring the lawyers in, and then we withdraw, and they can write up a contract. But other than that, 99.9% of the time, mediation agreements are not legally binding, and if they are, then that will all have been provided for in the contract, so that they know that it's a hybrid mediation. It's not your typical mediation. Lawyers are coming in and they will create the contract, but every 99% of mediations, the outcome is not legally binding. And as we've said there, the confidentiality and non-legally binding nature of the mediation hopefully gives clients the confidence to be creative and explore issues and think outside the box and really talk about what they want to talk about, rather than thinking, oh, you know, how will this position me in terms of maybe my solicitor's correspondence or litigation, or even just how will this position me? I don't feel comfortable talking about this because I know that that person's going to get really annoyed if I mention it again. So it's just a safe space for them to be able to talk about everything and really look at every alternative. Katie, thanks. Can we have the next slide?
So is mediation suitable? Mediation is suitable in many cases, but as I've said earlier, not all. And that's not necessarily because there are safeguarding concerns for that person entering mediation, but just somebody's capacity to want to do it and be able to do it. If you make a referral to a family mediation council accredited mediator, which is what people should be looking to access, there are lots of mediation companies out there, but they're not necessarily bound by the standards and the frameworks that we are through the Family Mediation Council and go through full accreditation. We will assess them separately to see if it is safe and suitable. I talked to you earlier about the screening that we go through. It's robust. It's testing to see what we need to know. Can this person move forward as far as we're concerned into that mediation? And that takes place in that MIAM assessment meeting. So domestic abuse screening is a critical part of the assessments to ensure that mediation is safe and it is suitable. We'll sometimes get somebody who's in a very difficult situation and maybe has been, experiencing domestic abuse in the home, who will say, I don't have any money. I can't afford a lawyer. I need to mediate. I can't do anything else because I don't have any money. As mediators, as hard as it is for us, we have to say, if we don't think it's suitable, it's not suitable. People think they might be able to come into mediation and manage situations, but the triggering nature of domestic abuse is very, very difficult when you're having to say no to somebody. So again, if we have to say no, we're then looking to try and move those people forward. So we'll
be signposting, won't we, Ruth, to local resources that we have, so local independent domestic abuse advisors and local charities who will be able to work with those people, carry out dash risk assessments. Yeah. So we as mediators will always have those links.
Yeah, we've always got those links, and we're not going to take somebody into mediation just because unfortunately they can't afford to take another path, because that's not how it works. And I think that should give you confidence as well to know that they are going to be, taken care of, I guess, from the information that they give to us. We have to make sure it's safe and we have to make sure that it's suitable for that person. And it will only proceed if it is safe and suitable. And there is a check-in every single time, every single session. The mediator is wanting to know whether anything has happened, anything they might need to know, to make sure it's not just done at that one assessment, at that initial intake. It's done through every mediation session that we have with them. And if they both wish to proceed, then yes, of course, we'll proceed. Can we have the next slide, please? So we've talked about intake and screening. We've talked about the importance of the domestic abuse screening, whether this is somebody's physically, emotionally or psychologically able to engage. It's not a small thing to say to somebody it's not suitable. So we will have gone through our checklist. If you're trying to find reasons to mediate, as a mediator doing an assessment, and how you might get a workaround, you probably shouldn't be doing it, because you're probably thinking, I really need to try and help, but I can't.
But there are some ways that we can try and create safety. So we do shuttle, and we will bring in independent domestic abuse advisors to support people through mediation if we think it's safe. Yeah. So we do come up with creative solutions, don't we, to try and
shuttle mediation is often used in those cases where a shuttle mediation means that those two parties are not having any direct conversation or contact with each other. Be that physically in a building, in a meeting room, or be that online. We have a system where we can shuttle in between them. So the mediator has a conversation with one of them and then takes that information over to the other person. It's It's different to a civil model in as much as the mediator is in most cases not going to hold confidences, but it depends on a setup and a framework of those sessions. But they can do mediation without any actual direct contact with that person. So again, in some cases, it is appropriate to move forward on that basis. And sometimes if you're in a mediation and things get, emotionally charged, we might switch to shuttle mediation for 5 or 10 minutes just to take the heat out of the situation. Online, that's really, really easy to achieve. And if you're in your own buildings and you're doing it, you've often got a waiting room so that you can kind of rotate people in and out. So we are always mindful of keeping everybody in a good space, and be that in a good headspace or a good physical space. All of those things are considered as we go through. And we regularly signpost. If we haven't got a connection locally with somebody to be able to refer them to, we'll always refer them to national services. And there's 2 national services there. Mankind Initiative deal with male victims of domestic abuse, and Women's Aid predominantly deal with women, but there are many local setups now where they are also putting up male domestic abuse units as well. In my local area, being Peterborough, there's recently been a new initiative where they now have a Women's Aid are providing male domestic abuse support. So we're not taking our role lightly, and we're not ignoring things. And I think that's really what we're trying to get across to the people that deal with people in difficult situations, is you're not sending them into a situation that we're not going to have had a look at, triaged and had a look at and see whether it's worth doing it or not. Could we have the next slide, please? So Mary, when is mediation suitable or unsuitable?
Yeah, so I think these are fairly obvious examples. So this one, if a parent's really upset and the other parent's introduced a new partner, and then the first parent stopped the children from being able to see that other parent because they have a safeguarding concern raising about the new partner. The new partner has a history of violence, then we probably wouldn't feel that that was suitable for mediation, and we probably would be signposting in the first instance to local authority early help services, to domestic abuse services, signposting to school and sharing that information, and trying to create a pathway to safeguarding, because obviously safeguarding children is an absolutely crucial fundamental tenet of what we do. And then the second scenario is where a client has engaged with domestic abuse services and is frightened of their ex-partner, and it's excuse me, exactly the scenario that Ruth has just said, that they don't want to go to court and they've got no money, so they just want to come to mediation, because although they're frightened and they've got a domestic abuse service on board, they don't have the money to go to court. And unfortunately, we've got so many alternative approaches to court. We've got so many things that we can suggest to people as alternative to using the court forum. But when there is a domestic abuse issue, where there's violence, where there's ongoing safeguarding concerns, really court, although it's the last resort, with those sorts of cases, it's pretty inevitable that they're going to need that protection and that reassurance that the court is going to put the safeguarding in place and the protective measures in place. So can we have the next slide, please, Katie? So we would probably, sorry, Ruth, yeah, carry on.
No, go.
So just scenario, there's a child arrangements order that's already been put in place, and the second parent refused to comply, turning up late, changing arrangements, and just being sort of unilaterally making decisions. That would be eminently suitable for mediation, we would say, I think, Ruth. Yep. There'd be no apparent reason not to bring those 2 people into mediation. Another scenario where you've got a couple who decide to separate, still living in the same house, need to sort out how to cover the bills, who's going to move out and when. That is, again, a very typical scenario for us of a mediation, a family mediation, where we're looking at short, medium and long term, as I said before, making things much more bite-sized, stop it not making things feel so overwhelming. So we would break that down and talk about interim bills, long-term maintenance, spousal maintenance, child support, how to meet the mortgage payments, etc. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of to what the sort of situations are that we would say typically would come into mediation. Go to the next slide, please, Katie.
So when to refer to a mediator, we would say any time. if there's confusion, you know, an impasse on agreements, just needing some support, contact us, because if we can't help you, we will signpost you to where you can get some help. It can help us at absolutely any stage. The earlier it happens, often the better, because people have then not got entrenched in their own position and find it really, really difficult to move. And again, Mary mentioned it earlier, when clients go to see lawyers and solicitors, they tell their story. The solicitor advises based on that story, but that's not the whole story. So people will sometimes come into mediation quite entrenched in what their legal advisors have told them. I think my response often is, I don't know what conversation you had with your legal advisor, so I don't know what that is based on. So let's look at the whole picture and see how we can move that forward. And that entrenchment can be quite challenging to get somebody out of that position, particularly if they've heard something from a legal position, because they feel that that's definitely the position. Don't be put off referring to us. They may not be speaking to each other. They may be arguing. There may be all this discord. That's every day. People come into mediation because they are often in dispute, and they need some support to be able to have those constructive conversations. We often hear at a MIAM assessment, oh, my ex-partner's not going to mediate. They've told me they're not going to mediate. They're not going to attend an assessment meeting. And we would always say, well, let us approach them, because they may have a very different response to us as the mediator. And also, once we've explained the process to them, they also may have a very different outcome. So don't let that be a barrier to somebody not coming in and kind of doing an assessment meeting. Yes, these disputes have been long-standing. Some of them are issues that have been present in the relationship all the way along. They just look bigger now. We're at the point of separation. And often you'll see things in separation that would have happened in that united family as well. So they're not new, they just appear to be bigger. I'll give you an example. You may have somebody who's had a new baby, and they've separated and they don't want their ex-partner to have that child on their own. They may have had another child previously, so we might ask, you know, what did that look like when you had the other child? Oh yes, I was never allowed to take the child out on my own. So that's not new, that's part of that model. So again, it's that confidence building. How does that mum be able to get in a situation where, you know, she hands her child over? She wouldn't have done it in her united household. So trying to do it in a separated household, it's very, very difficult. And that's where our external signposting and resourcing really comes into play. Things like health visitors, GPs, etc. Worrying about affordability. We're going to talk in a minute about some of the funding that's available. And there is funding available. And I think clients being aware that funding is available is absolutely critical when you're speaking to them as well. Saying, you know, even if you have a 5-10 minute conversation with a mediator on the phone, they're going to give you an outline of what the situation might look like as regards to funding as well. Can we have the next slide, please?
So I'm just going to really quickly run through this. Basically, we always recommend that you use the Family Mediation Council website to find a mediator. Anyone can call themselves a mediator, a family mediator. This register will guarantee quite a kite mark quality assurance. People on this register all have to sign up to the code of practice. Everyone on the register has to sign up to that. We have to ensure that we're properly assured, and we have to sign up to criteria for conducting our mediation assessment meetings. As I've said, we have to hit targets. We have to make sure we refer people to legal aid if that's suitable. We have to make sure that we signpost people. We have to explain the principles of mediation and so forth. So we will contract separately with the public in accordance with the Family Mediation Council, which is the overarching organisation that all the member organisations within the UK belong to, England and Wales. And just, you know, to make it easier for you, if someone mentions about a mediator, then what's helpful is that you can look by area, and you can filter down by, does that person offer legal aid? Does that person sign court forms? Is that person qualified to see children in mediation? And does that person offer online mediation? So there's plenty of filters to get the right person, the right mediator. because mediators will have a number of different backgrounds, as you can tell from Ruth and I. Ruth has a therapeutic background, I have a legal background. So it's really important that people who are looking at mediation can understand the service that they're using. And we would say that the starting point is always go to this website. Thanks very much, Katie. If you can move on, please. So again, how to refer to a mediator is just on that register, you'll see mediators who are accredited, who tend to be a bit more senior, and it gives you that quality assurance, and it develops links for you so that when you think, oh, you know, this client has got no money, needs legal aid and might need to be referred out to mediation, you can access this information and you can make sure that you can signpost your own patients or clients in the right direction. Thanks, Katie. We can have the next slide, please.
So legal aid is available for family mediation. There is a kind of concept out there that people think that legal aid is only available where domestic abuse is present. In family mediation, that is not the case. Legal aid is means tested based on their incomes, their assets, and if they speak to a mediator, even if that mediator doesn't do legal aid mediation, they should be able to just give them, you know, ask them a couple of questions. If you're on universal credit, you know, those types of things. At the moment, that's a passporting. And again, their assets will be assessed to see if they are, but it is not just linked to domestic abuse. And if that's the bit that you take away from it, legal aid funding. If they are eligible for legal aid, all of their mediation is free. They don't pay for any of it at all. And if one party is eligible for legal aid, the other party gets some of their mediation free as well.
So it's very well worth having, and it's not, as Ruth has said, the criteria is a lot lower than getting a full legal aid certificate for seeing a solicitor and having a court-based, litigation-based certificate and getting advice from a solicitor. And most of the benefits that are available are passporting for this. But even if somebody is in paid work, if they are under a certain threshold, they may still be eligible, provided that also their capital is under a certain threshold. We're not going to give you those thresholds today because they do change, but rest assured there will be a full assessment done of any mediation service that offers legal aid.
And there are legal aid checkers online that sometimes if someone calls, we might refer them to that and say, do you want to go through that assessment? Then legal aid services will call them back, have a conversation with them and tell them whether they're eligible for legal aid or not for family mediation. So again, there's that sort of empowerment of them taking that next step to see what they're going to do next. Can we have the next slide, please? And at the moment, we have some fantastic funding as well from the government. This has been in place, oh gosh, was it 2021, I think?
Yeah.
Yep, 2021 it started. It's now going to run up until March 2025. This is a government's pledging to contribute £500 currently to a mediation case where there is a child element within it. For families that are not eligible for legal aid, where there's a child element in their case, this is not means tested. They just have to give consent for the mediator to apply for it. A mediator will have signed up to be part of that voucher scheme as well. And then until that money is used, those clients don't pay anything. They have to pay for their initial assessments because we can't apply for the funding until those are done. But once those are done, we can then apply for the funding.
And we can use those vouchers really creatively. So if one person's eligible for legal aid and the other person isn't, they can use the voucher scheme. And if both of them are, or if they find that one of them says they can find it affordable, but the other person can't, we can then allocate the whole of that voucher fund for just one person, and then the other person can pay privately, so you get more mediation at a lower rate. You can use that £500 in any way you want. You can have long meetings, you can have a series of short meetings. So it really can be used creatively. And I would say, I don't know about you, Ruth, but I think it really does tip people over into using the mediation approach because, you know, they're paying for the initial assessment. That's always a lot cheaper. and then they're not having to pay for those initial joint meetings.
It kind of feels a little bit sort of try before you buy almost, really. You're doing your MIAM assessment, which is your triaging of your pathways. And if mediation is that pathway, then you're really getting to try and experience that without feeling that, oh, I could have spent that money maybe making my application or maybe speaking to my solicitor. You're not actually having to do that. You're coming into mediation and starting that exploration to see how that can work. And I think that's been massively beneficial to people taking up mediation, whereas in the past, maybe they wouldn't have done. They'd have used that initial bit of money to have made the application to the court and move forward from there.
And a free £500, I mean, who gets that these days?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
Katie, can we have the next slide, please? So just really in the last 5 minutes, we'd like to cover for you the benefits of mediation. I think we've tried to put that forward. I mean, I hope it will be self-evident that it's less stressful than going to court. It's not an easy thing to do, mediation. It is intense. You are often, if we do it online, you're on a screen like this, but you're setting it at your own time, to your own convenience. You're in your own home. And it's really intended as a less formal way of sorting things out. And as we've already said, it's not legally binding and we don't tell you what to do. It is usually cheaper than using solicitors, and we do encourage that you use solicitors in the background. We really hope that we can focus on children's interests first. Ruth's going to quickly talk about child inclusive mediation. And I said it's a modern, future-focused approach to resolving family situations. Can I have the next slide, please, Katie? So yeah, improved communication. I've just done a mediation where we've spent half of it talking about communication and the ways in which the parents can communicate. We really spend a lot of time working on that. I won't talk about enabling the voice of the child because Ruth's going to deal with that at the very end. And we focus on positive outcomes. So every time there is a solution reached, be it even on the smallest thing, we will make a note of that and make sure that that is built upon. So it's a really constructive way of approaching, family situations and family difficulties. Can we have the next slide, please, Katie?
So child inclusive mediation. So this is always undertaken by an accredited mediator that's done additional training to be able to see children and speak to children. Within the mediation framework, children aged sort of 10 and above should be able to have access to a mediator when their parents are discussing the arrangements for them, if they wish to do so. If they do have younger siblings, those younger siblings can attend as well so that they don't feel excluded from that process. Involving children in mediation is very complex and a great deal of preparation is needed before we would ever speak to a child. We have to make sure that the parents are ready to hear what that child's got to say. We have to make sure that, that the child wants to come into the process. This is all done by invitation. So we're saying to the parents, do we think it's going to be useful and beneficial to maybe hear what the child thinks? If they're both in agreement that that's the case, they'll give us consent. We'll then invite the child to see if they'd like to come in and see us. They can say no. And in fact, I think in my invitation, it says it's absolutely all right to say no. If you don't want to come, that's fine. But it gives them an opportunity to speak to somebody completely impartial who's nothing to do with the situation about some of the things that they think, their concerns, their worries. They are told they are not the decision makers. They are there to be able to offload the things that they want to say and be heard. The child also, with the exception of safeguarding, gets the choice as to what they share with their parents. They'll often say to us, oh, this is a bit of an issue, but don't tell them. And we might go, well, why are we not going to tell them then? Because that might be quite important to tell your parents about. Oh, no, because mum will go mad or dad will go mad, or no, just don't do it, just don't do it. And we go, that's absolutely fine. We're not going to tell them unless you give us consent to do so. But then we'll help that young person by saying, what's going to happen if we don't talk about it? What happens if we do talk about it? So we're trying to help them as well, bring their voice into that room. Sometimes parents suggest the child is to be seen. Sometimes the child will suggest it. The child will be chomping at the bit to come in and tell the mediator all the things they want to happen and their lovely shopping list, which will say, we're not going to be able to guarantee that any of those things are going to happen. But if you would like us to take them forward to your parents, then obviously, yes, we'll talk about them. So a child feeling that they're part of that process, that they've been heard, you know, that they've got a voice. But again, with the emphasis on the fact that it has to be deemed suitable. So the mediator has to think that it's suitable for that child to be seen. Direct consultation with the child is done individually. The mediator sees the child on their own. The child is not put in the room with their parents. There are some feedback sessions where teenagers have wanted to be in the room, and that has been facilitated. But again, we're always managing that situation and seeing what's going to happen next. Very often, the child has minor things. They're not always major things. Just tell them to stop arguing. Just leave me out of it. I just want to get on with my life. Really simple things. Or actually, you know, I'd like to go to my mum's or my dad's on a Friday because they have a takeaway. So I'd quite like to go there on a Friday. So again, they're not major things often. There are situations, obviously, we deal with which are much more acute, and there are issues, and we have to be mindful and careful of those. And again, if a child tells us things, doesn't want us to share them, sometimes that child needs support. So we might feed back to the parents that actually some extra support might be beneficial in those situations. So it's not a piece of work that is done automatically. It should always be done by an accredited mediator who's taken on additional training. And again, those are found on the Family Mediation Council website. You can find out who they are. Have you got anything to add to that, Mary?
No, I thought that was a really good summary. Thank you, Ruth. Katie, have the next slide, please. So in terms of the point about legal advice, we did talk about that previously. We would never say mediation excludes other alternatives. We would also always say that mediation it's a staircase. So you might go start from a really informal arrangement where you're trying to chat things between yourself, right up to getting a court involved and the court making a decision. And on the way, you might, even if you're in court, come back down into mediation, or even if you're trying to sort it out yourself, go into mediation. So it's fluid, it's very flexible, and taking legal advice in parallel with going into mediation is encouraged, and we are required to signpost that within our mediation intake sessions. We talked about signposting to other sources of support, for example, GPs, counsellors. We will also work with people who are already seeing a specialist. So, for example, if I have a neurodiverse client, I might suggest that they can talk to their whoever their practitioner is to give me some clues and guidance as to how I can manage that within mediation. So if I have an ADHD client, for example, their practitioner might say, well, you know, take lots of breaks, use drawings, don't have really long sessions, etc. So we will work with people, and we'll talk about all the different approaches, as we said. So that will include using lawyers and going to court if necessary. Sometimes that's not an alternative for people, but by and large, we're trying to keep people out of court. And thank you, Katie. So we'd just like to say thank you so much for sticking with us. I know it's a really difficult session on a Friday. We really appreciate your time. You've not asked many questions. If there are any more questions, you've got our details up there. Please do feel free to contact us direct. Or you might find the information from the Family Mediation Council website. But from myself, Mary Raymond, and from Ruth.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody has got any questions they want to quickly ask, I'm happy to stay on for a couple of minutes. If people have got things, if you need to go, that's absolutely fine. But we'll just give you a couple of minutes. If you wanted to ask any questions, please put them in the chat box. If not, by all means, contact myself or Mary. And it's been a pleasure. And I hope that you now have some confidence in referring your clients and your patients to mediation or to a MIAM assessment.
Yeah, or at least you know what it is if they mention it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we've got any questions, Mary. So hopefully we have answered them all.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Katie, for supporting us, and we'll close the session. Thank you.